Senator from Alaska is recognized.
Mr. President, I want to spend a few minutes talking about the President's nominee to be Comptroller of the Currency and her recent comments on those of us who are actually asking questions about her background, because they're pretty outrageous, and I think it's time, in some ways, we got to stop. We need to put an end to this notion that you can't criticize someone for their ideas without being charged with things like maybe racism, which kind of gets me a little bit riled up since I think I was one of the targets of her remarks. I've been down on the floor talking about some of the nominees that this administration's put forward. Some are so radical, far left. The ATF nominee was actually against the Second Amendment. He got withdrawn. The BLM director was an eco-terrorist. She got voted in. Now she's in charge of 60% of my state. Remarkable. I think a lot of senators are going to reject that vote. And now we have a nominee to be the Comptroller of the Currency, Saule Omarova. She's charged with chartering, regulating, supervising all national banks. Really important position. For a capitalist economy in particular, there's a problem though, Mr. President. It doesn't seem like she much likes banks, or for that matter, the free market, or for that matter, capitalism, or the financial system in America. So senators have been coming down the floor in committee, asking questions, doing our due diligence on this nominee. I want to commend Senator Toomey in particular, who has been doing that, and I've been joining him. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about her background and her ideas, which, by the way, have nothing to do with her race or her sex. Nothing. I just want to know what her ideas are. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. 1989, graduate of Moscow State University, where she received the Lenin Personal Academic Scholarship. That's the Vladimir Lenin Personal Academic Scholarship. And from what we know about her writings, yes, she was raised in a communist country. That's nothing against her, but sometimes you get notions of capitalism, socialism, communism, Marxism. And her writings are something that are of interest to the committee, certainly to me, certainly to Senator Toomey, about what she believes in terms of the financial system. Socialism, communism. Here's what she tweeted in 2019, just 2 years ago. Until I came to the U.S., I couldn't imagine things like gender pay gap still existed in today's world. Say what you want about the old USSR, but there was no pay gap there. Markets don't always work best. That's a tweet 2 years ago. Say what you want about the old USSR, about Stalin and Lenin and the roughly 100 million people killed during their reign. Say what you want about the old USSR, the famine, the human degradation, the ill-fated violent attempts to snuff out freedom and liberty there and all across the world. She clarified, I never claimed men and women were treated absolutely equal in every facet of the old Soviet Union, but people's salaries were set by the state in a gender-blind manner. Those things are still a pipe dream in American society. I mean, listen to her. This is just 2 years ago. Still talking about the golden days of the USSR. There was gender equity, all right. Both sexes starved equally. And if you complained, you were sent to Siberia, regardless if you were a man or a woman. But, Mr. President, her nostalgia for socialist communist policies doesn't end with pay disparities. She has advocated for expanding the Federal Reserve's mandate to include the Federal Reserve People's Ledger, as she has written about, a people's ledger. By separating the lending function from the monetary function, the proposed reform that she's talked about will effectively, quote, end banking as we know it. This was written in 2014 as a professor. These are radical radical ideas. These are ideas. And this person is supposed to be charged with being in charge of the financial system of America. Capitalism, some of us still believe in capitalism here, some don't. But it's okay to question these ideas. She's put them out there. The ranking member of the Banking Committee has asked for her a copy of her thesis. Now, every member going through confirmation of the Senate is supposed to give up any writings that she had. This used to be on her CV until a couple years ago, then she deleted it. It's called Karl Marx's Economic Analysis in the Theory of Revolution in the Capital. So, Senator Toomey's asked for that. She's required to give it. And as of now, this is a letter, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to submit for the record, October 5th. Senator Toomey asked for this.
Without objection.
She still hasn't responded and provided it. She's required to. But again, Mr. President, these are ideas. These are her ideas. Very fair for United States senators to ask for these things, to evaluate these things. Do we want someone who doesn't believe in the financial system and capitalism in charge of American banks? I don't. So I'd like to learn more. And so we've been pressing. That's our job. That's our job. So she hasn't responded to Senator Toomey. As I mentioned, in a reference to a 2014 book entitled The End of Banking, she wrote, quote, by separating their lending function from the monetary function, the proposed reform for the Fed will effectively, quote, end banking as we know it. That's a really interesting radical idea. That's 2014. These are her ideas. These are her ideas. And if there's any doubt about her continued interest in Marxist ideology, it was recently reported that she joined a Facebook group called, quote, Marxist Analysis and Policy, which according to the group, quote, stands for the self-emancipation of the working class and socialism, unquote. Recent. This is recent. This wasn't when she was at old Moscow State University. Recent. She has not said that story was wrong about her Facebook group, so we can only assume it's true. Did she join that group to espouse democracy and the free market? Here are the group's rules. Quote, support for the Tory party is not acceptable. A culture of diverse Marxist, socialist, and radical views is the framework for the group, unquote. Again, these are ideas, radical ideas, socialist ideas that are coming from the woman who has been nominated by the President of the United States to be in charge of all the banks, the Comptroller of the currency. Really important job. So we've been asking about this. We've been asking about this. We want to see her writings. This is completely legitimate. That the American people want the Senate to be doing this, advice and consent. What do you really think? Do you believe in capitalism? Do you believe in banks? You want to end banking as we know it? Well, how is that going to work if you're comptroller of the currency? So we're asking for these things, asking for her thesis. And then, Mr. President, sadly, because I think Americans are finally getting tired of this, she was asked about this Republican criticism. It's legitimate criticism. And the quote was, well, I'm an easy target. This is quoting from her now, an immigrant, a woman, a minority. And asked if she thought of some of the criticism of her that I'm just describing. I'm one of the critics. Was criticism based on her critics being, quote, racist? She said, quote, I think that is true. So here's my point, Mr. President. I think the American people are getting a little tired of this. I think the American people are getting a little tired of this. I and other senators have been asking very legitimate questions about this woman's beliefs, about what's in her head, about how would she be the comptroller of the currency. And the response is from her, my critics are, quote, racist. Let me be a little more blunt. This is patently absurd. United States senators are allowed to ask questions, sometimes pointed questions of nominees. The presiding officer certainly has done that in his career, and I respect that. But every time someone asks you a pointed question, if you come back and say, well, they're doing it for these nefarious reasons like racism, it really doesn't advance the discussion now, does it? Especially here on the floor of the United States Senate. I really hope my colleagues here, whether you're a Democrat or Republican, can maybe tell the nominee, hey, don't do that again, right? Don't do that again. These senators are asking, I think I'm asking, very legitimate questions. Like, number one, do you believe in capitalism? Do you believe in the financial system of America? You're going to be put in charge of it. I think it's quite legit to ask her that. Her writing indicates she doesn't. This nominee has some very troubling views. We are allowed, in fact, we are required to fully vet nominees. And calling senators racist or sexist for doing so, this vetting, is actually a disgraceful tactic that they might have used in the Soviet Union, that they might have used at Moscow State University in other eras to silence voices. But it's not going to work here on the Senate floor. So the nominee needs to drop that tactic. You're not going to silence me. You're not going to silence Senator Toomey. And I would just say this more generally, and we all know it, and we all feel it. Americans, men, women, black, white, brown, native, non-native, people are starting to get tired of this tactic that when you criticize someone on their beliefs, they try to silence you or cancel you or end the discussion by bringing out you're the racist criticism. Let's not do that here. This nominee needs to come forward, needs to answer questions, needs to provide us with her thesis, which is about her beliefs on socialism and capitalism. And we're going to continue to do our business in the vetting. But I can tell you, I'm one senator who is not going to be silenced by a woman who's being criticized, a nominee, it doesn't matter woman or man, who's being criticized for very legitimate reasons and then turns around and tries to slander her critics. It's not going to work. As a matter of fact, I think it's going to make it much harder for this nominee to be confirmed. I hope my colleagues look hard at her record, and I hope those who are advising her tell her to tone it down. Those tactics might work in the Soviet Union, where she seems to have a lot of affection for still, but they're not going to work in the United States of America, and they're really not going to work in the halls of the United States Senate.